Hello and welcome into another episode of Lockdown Wolves. This is the post-game podcast for the Timberwolves' 15-point win over the Hornets. We're going to talk about Jaden McDaniels' near-career night, a near triple-double for Julius Randle. Also some defensive rebounding issues, which really kind of allowed the Hornets to hang around in this one. But lots of positives to take away from this win on a back-to-back for Minnesota. We'll break it all down next. Welcome in. You are Lockdown Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Lockdown Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Lockdown Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Happy Thursday, everybody. It's a victory Thursday after the Wolves won in Charlotte on Wednesday night. A nice back-to-back home road winning streak here, we'll call it, against the Sixers at home Tuesday, and then landing in Charlotte apparently like 4:30 in the morning. Charlotte time, beating the Hornets Wednesday night. Obviously, both important wins for Minnesota. Every win is important, but a lot to like about this one for the Wolves. Mike Conley took the night off resting. Rudy's still out. And that meant the starting lineup had to do a lot of heavy lifting, and they did in this game. Lots of fun, positive takeaways that we'll get to here on the post-game pod. A big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can subscribe to the daily Locked On Wolves newsletter at lockedondaily.com. One stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at lockedondaily.com. All right. Lots to get to here. Talking about Wolves Hornets, a really overall positive game for the Timberwolves, and lots of positive takeaways in this one. Would it have been nice to fully put the Hornets away when the Wolves were up 22 early in the fourth quarter? Yeah, it would have been. There was a bit of rushed offense, a lot of lackadaisical defense. We'll talk about that allowed Charlotte to get back to within 10 points with, I don't know, what was it, 12 with 3 minutes to play, but I think it was more like 10 with 5 minutes to play. It was closer than it should have been, to be sure. But let's start at the beginning of the game. Tuesday night against Philly, early in the game, there was just not very much good offense by either team. It was a clunk fest or clank fest, if you will. I think either term works here. Not much offense to go around. There was actual offensive flow early in this game for Minnesota, and obviously it helps that Charlotte is a miserable defensive team. That certainly played into this, and we'll certainly talk about how not only was there good offense, there was also a lot of bad defense in this game for both teams. But it was really the opposite of what we saw against Philly at Target Center on Tuesday. Just no offense early in that one. This was all offense early in this game. Minnesota scored 39 points in the first quarter. I believe they only had 2 turnovers, and they made a ton of threes. They were getting up shots. They also, early in the first quarter, they missed a lot of shots. They had some offensive rebound opportunities. Jaden McDaniels had a pair of offensive rebounds and putbacks very early in this game that helped the Wolves kind of get off and running offensively. I think Charlotte was up quickly. They were up 8-2. And then it was just all of a sudden Jaden McDaniels was getting after it with offensive rebounds, knocked out a 3, had a big dunk. And we'll talk a lot about Jaden on the show today. He was fantastic, but he was a big part of the Wolves offense very early in this game, really getting going. Minnesota was up 11 at the end of the first quarter. And again, ball movement, offensive flow, really positive. The activity level from Jaden McDaniels, the activity level on the offensive glass early in this game, even with the spotty shooting, the complete lack of turnovers was huge. I think I said they had 2 first turnovers in the first quarter. I believe that number is actually 2 turnovers at halftime. For the game, Minnesota only had 5 turnovers, which is incredible for a team that had been so bad for so long turnover-wise. And coming into this game, remember, I talked about this, I think it would have probably been Tuesday's show, that the Wolves are 10th in the NBA in turnover rate, as in the 10th lowest turnover rate since January 1st. Overall for the year, they're still I think bottom 3rd, but they were bottom 5 for the first 2+ months of the season. They were bad with it the last couple of seasons. it's continued to trend in the right direction where Minnesota is just pulling the trigger on more shots, getting more shots up on the rim and turning it over less. Turns out the more shots you shoot, the better position you're going to be in offensively. Like that's really it. Like obviously you got to be efficient on some level, but the more shots you get up, the better shot you have, which goes to offensive rebounding, which they've done a ton of since the beginning of January. It also helps you get to the free throw line more often. We know shots off of offensive rebounds are more likely to lead to open layups or dunks, getting to the free throw line, or kickouts for open threes, which we saw a little bit of in this game too. And then also playing faster. And I was a little worried about this game because of the high variance that Charlotte plays with. They're not like a super fast-paced team, but they can play fast-paced. And if LaMelo Ball gets on a heater, like, look out. They've still got Miles Bridges. Like, this is a team that can still score in bunches and can lead you down a path of a high-variance game. They're also a team that can offensive rebound as well. And, that, especially with Jusuf Nurkic now in the fold with Charlotte, they're a number 7 in the NBA in offensive rebound rate on the season, but have trended better in that direction with, on top of Mark Williams having Jusuf Nurkic. He only played 12 minutes in this game, but like he had 3 offensive rebounds in his 12 minutes. Like that is something that is an Achilles heel for the Wolves. And so I was a bit concerned about that possibility. And sure enough, down the stretch, it kind of reared its ugly head, the defensive rebounding issues for Minnesota. We'll get to that here in a minute. Overall for this game, as it wore on, Minnesota was up 11 at the end of the first quarter. They were still up by 7 at halftime. And then they were a +7 in the third quarter, which meant they were up 14 going to the fourth. They quickly built it to a 22-point lead. And then some of those same defensive issues we saw in the first half that improved a little in the third quarter came back. A lot of Ole defense. It wasn't just one guy. It was basically everybody. There were a couple spurts of like Ant really competing defensively and Jaden really competing defensively. But for the most part, the Hornets got to the rim when they wanted to in this game. And I want to dig in a bit on what some of those issues were. I touched on defensive rebounding. We'll talk about points in the paint. Some of these same problems that we've seen against inferior competition of late were problems again in this one in fits and starts. And ultimately it didn't matter because Charlotte's not good and the Wolves were awesome offensively, which we'll dig into as well. But that's, those are categories we still have to look out for moving forward, given some of the upcoming opponents for Minnesota and where Minnesota is in the standings. They can't exactly just like mess around. Every game is important. Even against a team like Miami upcoming here on Friday night's a good example. A team that made trades, has guys that are out, and is now 3 games below 500, but a very capable team, obviously a well-coached team, a team with still good players. They gave Cleveland a run for their money on Wednesday night, only lost by 5 to Cleveland, and only lost the Knicks in overtime by 4 the other night, beat the Pacers. Like, still a capable Heat team. Remember, the Wolves lost to the Heat when Jimmy Butler was out earlier this year, one of the worst losses of the season back in like early mid-November. So all that to say, we'll talk about some of those issues. We'll also talk about some of the positives in the box score. We'll close with individual studs and duds and peek ahead at the schedule. That's what we'll do here on the remainder of the show today. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is sponsored by BetterHelp. Who's in your support system? We all need people to lean on, whether it's friends, family, mentors, or professionals. Even the strongest leaders and athletes know that asking for help makes them better. Therapy is one of the best ways to build a strong support system. It's not just for tough times. It helps with setting boundaries, developing coping skills, and becoming the best version of yourself. It's super important to just learn how to ask for help, which is something that I've struggled with at times in my life. But I've also seen firsthand how valuable it can be to have a support system that can help keep you grounded and motivated and encourages you to ask for help, even when you're not sure that you need it. If you think you might, it's probably worth asking. Also, therapy isn't just about crisis moments. It's a tool for self-improvement, stress management, and navigating life's challenges. Build your support system with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. All right. So we talked about a bit of the game flow. Remember, Minnesota up 22 in the fourth quarter. Ole defense and some rush shot selection on offense, not turnovers, because again, the Wolves had 2 at halftime and 5 for the game. But it was really rush shot selection, sloppy defense, And that allowed Charlotte to at least make it interesting enough that Chris Finch had to call a timeout with a couple minutes to play. Let's talk about some positives. I mentioned the offensive flow early in the game. I thought overall there was solid offensive flow at any given point in the game, other than some of the rush shots late. The biggest thing was probably Julius Randle getting downhill and distributing, which obviously he can do. We know he can do that. But to see him really, truly, like, there were a couple of possessions where he put his head down and kind of drove into traffic and got stuck. But for the most part, this was legitimate facilitation. It was legitimate point forward play where Randall was like, all right, I'm going to take the guy in front of me. And if they swarm me in the paint, I'm going to kick this out to an open shooter. To the tune of 9 assists, a team high 9 assists for Julius Randle. And in a game with no Mike Conley, and in a game where the Hornets were aggressively doubling Anthony Edwards, they needed Julius Randle to produce something, to generate some offense, even if it wasn't his own offense, which he did a little bit of too, but to generate offense for others and be that true second best player on a playoff team, a championship contender team. That is what Julius Randle was. 25, 10, and 9. Good decision making. He was 6 of 11 on 2-point shots, 2 of 7 on threes, got to the line 8 times, was tied Ant for the team lead in free throw attempts, and only 2 turnovers for Julius Randle. The style, the method in which he played and the method in which he went about his business in this game was very businesslike, very professional, very effective for Julius Randle, and helped the Wolves kind of stimulate some offense when Ant was being aggressively blitzed on the perimeter, which we could talk about that too. Anthony Edwards, I mean, the Hornets, it ratcheted up as the game went on. He had a little bit of a slow start early, heated up late in the first quarter into the early second quarter, or I guess he takes his rest early second quarter into the middle stage of the second quarter when he came back on the floor. And as the game wore on and Charlotte ratcheted up that blitz and ratcheted up really double teaming him out near the timeline, trying to trap him, Ant, first of all, did a great job of passing out of the double right when it got there. Not too early, not too late. The timing was actually very good for Anthony Edwards on a lot of those passes, which is not always the case. I think it's an area he's grown, but he's still not fully consistent in. He had 29 points on 20 shots. We'll take 9 of 20. We'll take 6 of 13 on threes. High volume of makes as well. Did miss for 3 free throws. Was 5 of 8 at the line. 6 assists, 0 turnovers for Anthony Edwards. Minnesota had 5 turnovers as a team. Randle had 2. McDaniels had 1. Reed had 1. And DiVincenzo had 1. Ant had 0 turnovers. He was second on the team with 6 assists. After a game against Philly, I talked about this on the post-game pod on Wednesday. Anthony Edwards, like when he was off the floor, the Wolves played better against the 76ers. That was not the case in this game. It was basically the same, whether it was on or off the floor. But Ant was really, really good. 29, 6 assists, 0 turnovers, 6 made threes is a big game for Anthony Edwards. He was getting downhill, but it wasn't always for himself because of the doubles. He was getting downhill to distribute for others. There were a lot of kickouts from Ant to other teammates. He had the really nice assist to Dante for like the final dagger, I think it was, in the closing few minutes, where Ant drove a seam to his right, actually got to the rim on the right side of the floor, and then struck a pose down underneath the basket out of bounds after kicking the pass out to Dante for a deep 3. That was one of the several daggers there down the stretch off a really nice pass from Anthony Edwards. I thought this was just a well-rounded Ant game, a well-played Ant game. It's not the headline grabber, right? Like the headline is the near triple-double for Julius Randle. The headline is Jaden dropping 29. We'll talk more about that. It's DiVincenzo playing well in the starting lineup. But it's not Anthony Edwards. And yet this is a really strong, solid performance from Ant. No question about it. All right, let's talk some negatives. I do want to talk Jaden McDaniels. We'll do that in studs and duds. It was just another strong Jaden performance. But I want to talk about a couple of concerns. I talked about the defense down the stretch. We talked about the rebounding, which let me just reiterate that. Charlotte had 20 offensive rebounds. They are a good offensive rebounding team. They have a 30% offensive rebound rate. Nearly a third of opponent shots nearly a third of Hornets missed shots are rebounded by the Hornets. They're 7th in the league coming in offensive rebound rate, according to Cleaning the Glass. And that was a problem for Minnesota in this game. Minnesota has improved a little on the defensive glass. They're middle of the pack. They're 16th coming into the game, but they have these games where they just can't secure defensive rebounds. Now, Charlotte, there were some long rebounds in there. They did attempt 42 threes in this game, and like LaMelo Ball was clanking threes. Like he was 4 of 12 on threes. Miles Bridges was 1 of 8 on threes. So those guys combined to go 5 of 20 on three-pointers. So there were a lot of long rebounds, a lot of intermediate, kind of middle of the floor rebounds. But still, the Wolves allowed Charlotte too many second chance opportunities. And then the other thing that's a concern is the points in the paint. Charlotte had 58 points in the paint in this game. 58 points in the paint on top of attempting 42 threes. And that's how many additional opportunities Charlotte had in this game because of all the offensive rebounds. Now, thankfully, they also turned it over 15 times. So overall for the game, Charlotte actually only attempted 5 more shots than Minnesota, but it could have been a lot worse because of the 20 offensive rebounds to the Wolves' 10. Now, the difference there is Charlotte turned it over 15 times. I think earlier I said the Wolves turned it over 5. They actually turned it over 6 times. Still a great number. And the Wolves were able to score 18 points off those 15 Charlotte turnovers, which was big. But back to the points in the paint point that I'm making, 58 points in the paint for Charlotte is way too many. I mean, this isn't like Joel Embiid. It's not prime Shaq. Like, this is the Charlotte Hornets who lean on perimeter guys like LaMelo Ball and Miles Bridges. I mean, Mark Williams is nice, but like, Seth Curry was third on the team in scoring in this game, and 4 of his 5 made shots were threes. Like, and the only other one he made was that weird like push shot, double clutch kind of floater thing at the end of the third quarter, I think it was. There were dudes that just got to the rim too easily in this game. And then the offensive rebounding, of course, contributes to that with the points of the paint. They need Rudy Gobert back. That's the moral of the story, both from a rebounding standpoint and from an overall points of the paint standpoint, which, of course, is linked to the rebounding, the offensive rebounding, at least for opponents. But the Rudy Gobert absence has been felt in a lot of ways here recently. We talked about this yesterday. The Sixers scored a lot more points in the paint than Minnesota. Again, linked to Rudy Gobert not being there. He makes a massive difference for this team. Apparently, he worked out hard before the game. It seems like there's a real chance he comes back very soon. The Wolves play next Friday, and then I believe Sunday, and then are off Monday, Tuesday. So maybe he sits Friday. They get him into a game Sunday. Then he gets another 2 days off before the Wolves play again next Wednesday. That's a real possibility for Rudy, but it does seem like he's close to coming back from the back issue that he's been out with since the game right before the All-Star break. And remember, he'd only missed 1 game to that point. So he's been healthy this season for Minnesota, and there's no sense in rushing it against opponents like a depleted Sixers team and a worn down, not good, and also shorthanded Hornets team. So all that to say, though, the points in the paint thing, the defensive rebounding thing, a concern to be sure that needs to be shored up here moving forward. All right, let's close by talking individual studs and duds. We'll shine a light on Jaden McDaniels' performance. We'll do all of that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors over at FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. If you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. The Wolves came into this game, I think, 9-point favorites on FanDuel, and, I don't know. I would have been hammering, whatever that line moved to live betting wise in the fourth quarter, but it got close. It got down to about 10. Of course, the Wolves ended up covering the initial line, winning by 15 points. The Sixers game Tuesday, another example. Maybe you're just expecting a late game rally for the Wolves, or maybe you think Ant's going to hit a clutch 3. Whatever it might be, you'll never feel like you missed your chance because of the live betting feature at FanDuel. The app is super easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can bet $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, let's talk studs and duds. We talked about Julius Randle already, so just real quickly on him, a really strong Julius game. He's been great since coming back from injury in his last 3, the Phoenix, Philadelphia, then this game, 3 games the last 4 nights. 25, 10, and 9, 8 of 18 shooting, 2 of 7 outside the arc, 7 of 8 on free throws, only 2 turnovers. And I thought he played really well. I thought the decision-making was on point. It was a lot like the Phoenix game and like, hey, here's somebody else that can draw the defense's attention. In this case, it wasn't as much to open up for Ant. It was to be the answer for when the Hornets aggressively doubled Anthony Edwards. On Sunday, it was more like, hey, I'm over here. You got to pay attention to me. And now Ant's going to attack on the other side of the floor because you're watching me. This was the other side of that coin. If the defense overplays Ant, you have somebody else that can not only hurt you himself, but if he keeps his head up and doesn't bull in a china shop himself in the middle of the floor, then Julius Randle can also be a facilitator, a distributor for others. So it's not simply a dude that's going to put his head down and only, do that. If we get this version of Julius Randle that could do both, that can be a potent scorer in the mid-range, that can knock down an open three in a pinch, that can get to the free throw line with consistency, that can be physical and wear you down, but can also contribute as a facilitator and get teammates involved. That's exactly what the Timberwolves need, and he was great. Jaden McDaniels, 29 points, 10 rebounds, 4 assists, 2 steals. I believe his career high is 31 points, only a bucket away. He missed a 3 with a few minutes left that would have given him a career high and would have given Julius Randle a triple-double, which I think would have been his first in a Timberwolves uniform. Jaden was awesome. He attempted more shots than anybody on the Wolves. 21 shots to Ant's 20. He made more shots than anybody on the Wolves, was a super efficient 13 to 21. He didn't get to the free throw line at all. He just doesn't. And he shoots that like leaner, which I used to poke fun at, the kind of like, it's like Kevin Durant, but not as pretty. And also more horizontal, more parallel to the floor than Kevin Durant, right? Durant, it's more the ball's over his head and it's almost more of a Kevin Garnett type of a fadeaway. Whereas McDaniels gets parallel to the floor pretty much and has that weird release point, but it's effective. And he scored every which way early. I talked earlier about the 2 offensive rebounds and putbacks, the 2 3-pointers early, the dunk off the dribble early. We also saw him score on that fade, especially in the second half when the Wolves were searching a little for some offense. Jaden was huge. He tied for the team lead in points at 29 and tied for the team lead in rebounds at 10. Also pitched in with 4 assists, 2 steals, only 1 turnover, and was not in foul trouble. 38 minutes played for Jaden. He continues to really have a nice breakout. We'll call it flip of the calendar to 2025. I mean, he's just been great. He had 17 points the night prior against Philadelphia, and those 4 blocks he had in that game as well. He's just really on a heater right now, not just offensively, but across the board. A strong game for Jaden McDaniels. So Julius, Jaden McDaniels, and I'm also going to go Anthony Edwards. I talked about his game earlier. He tied with Jaden for the team high in 29 points, 6 assists to no turnovers, 6 of 13 on threes, 9 of 20 from the field, which means he was 3 of 7 on twos, got to the line 8 times and made 5 free throws. Similar to Julius Randle's game, just a smart offensive game. Everybody had lapses defensively. I'm not running away from that. It's a thing that happened. It was disappointing. But when their defense is just as bad, I mean, they were fortunate that Charlotte's defense was not only just as bad, but worse. And Minnesota made shots. I mean, they were 43% on 49 3-point attempts. That's still a recipe to win. And I would say both Ant and Randle had such professional games offensively. That's the word I would use for how they performed. They were both very professional offensively, hovering around 50% from the field. They each got to the line 8 times. They combined for 15 assists and only 2 turnovers in this game. They combined for 13 rebounds. Well-rounded games from Julius and from Ant. The 2 stars, it's what you need to see. And then, of course, Jaden McDaniels, 29, 10, and 4, and 2 steals that we talked about already. Nas had a quieter game. He actually led in plus-minus, which I would not have guessed. He was not as bad shooting as he had been previously, not the last, 10 or so games prior to last night, or Tuesday night, I should say, against the Sixers. But he didn't shoot the ball quite that well either. He's 5 of 12, which is fine. 2 of 7 on threes. So he was 3 of 5 on twos, 2 of 7 on threes, 10 boards, 2 assists for Naz Reid. DiVincenzo was really good. He had a couple of late threes that were kind of double daggers against the Sixers here. 16 and 5, 5 of 7 shooting, 4 of 5 on threes for DiVincenzo in a starting role with Mike Conley resting. I mentioned that off the top, but Conley rested in this game. Still no Rudy Gobert. That meant the starting lineup included DiVincenzo. The bench rotation, 30 minutes of Nickeil Alexander-Walker. So you had 6 guys that all played 30 or more minutes. 14 minutes of Jalen Clark, 13 of TJ Shannon, and 6 minutes for Rob Dillingham, which I think were all first half minutes. He knocked out a 3 in that span. Shannon was good. I thought he wreaked a little bit of havoc, which is nice to see. Jalen Clark looked to get banged up at one point, but came back in the game late defensively. And it was fun watching him press up on LaMelo Ball. That's also when Ant got into things, is when he was guarding LaMelo, was like really trying to press up and play real defense. But it's just fun to watch Jalen Clark do that. A much quieter game for Nickeil, only 3 points, 3 assists, 4 rebounds after a big game the other night. Overall, nobody on the bench scored more than 4 points in this game. You had 3 threes and a 4-point. Everybody in the starting lineup had 13 or more, and everyone in the starting lineup had multiple made threes in this game as well. So a top-heavy game for Minnesota, but a strong win, a solid win. It would have been great to win by 20+, but we'll take the 15-point win. Strong performance for Minnesota. Looking ahead now, the Timberwolves are still on the road. They head down to Miami to take on the Miami Heat on Friday night, 7 p.m. Central tip. The Wolves, this is the weird trip to Miami that doesn't also include a trip to Orlando, where they already went earlier this year. But here we are, a one-off in Miami, and then back to Minnesota for a 1-game homestand on Sunday against San Antonio. Of course, both games the Wolves should win against Miami and a Wemby-less San Antonio team. So if that's the case, if they could win both of these games, then the Wolves would be at their high water mark of 8 games above 500 on the season. They've not been better than 7 above 500. They're currently 6. They beat Miami. They beat San Antonio. They'll be 7 above 500, which again would be a high water mark for the season for Minnesota. Right now, as of this recording, the Timberwolves are tied with Golden State for the 6th spot in the Western Conference. They're 1 behind in the loss column. They're 1 ahead in the win column. They've played 2 more games, but they have a better point differential. And as of right now, don't look now, ladies and gentlemen, but the Timberwolves have the 4th best point differential in the Western Conference, which I realize is not how they see teams for the playoffs, but they moved ahead of the Houston Rockets. They're behind only the Thunder, the Grizzlies, and the Nuggets. And yes, I know the Lakers are better now than they were earlier this season. They've won 7 in a row. They just recently beat the Wolves. I get it. But still. That's not changing tonight, by the way. Last night, Golden State did not play Wednesday night. As I record this, Memphis is trailing OKC, and the Kings are up 9 on Denver early in the 4th quarter. So I think it's time to scoreboard watch. We're going to do that here. Minnesota is now 3 games behind Houston for the 5 spot in the West, tied for Golden State for 6, and is a game clear of Sacramento, holding down that tie for 6/7 in the West. So depending on how Sacramento-Denver turns out, the Wolves are 5.5 behind Denver and only 1 up on Sacramento. I still kind of want Denver to lose because I'm holding out hope the Wolves can get into the top 4. I think that's still feasible sitting here right now, given how easy the Wolves schedule is upcoming. All right. That's all I got for you today here on the show. We'll be back, of course, on Friday. We'll get you ready for the Wolves Heat game Friday night. We haven't seen Miami since November 10th. Very different looking Miami team since then. So we'll break that down and get you ready for that game as part of Friday's show. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. A reminder, you can also subscribe to the daily Locked On Wolves newsletter at lockedondaily.com. One stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at lockedondaily.com. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.